officially live. I'm so excited to dive into another episode of our pre-symposium panel on the topic, how to help employees effectively balance strategic work with tactical work. So this is a preamble as we lead up to our executive symposium that's happening later this week, Thursday, August 15th in Austin, Texas. So if you are going to be in Austin, Texas, if you're living in Austin, if you're a leader and you want to connect with these three great leaders, as well as come and meet other great leaders that are talking about how to help employees effectively balance strategic work with tactical work, come to the Executive Symposium on Thursday. I'll post a link in the comments on this post on how to RSVP. Would love to see you there. But we've got three great leaders who are going to be at the Executive Symposium here to talk about the topic itself. We've got Lizza, we've got Keith, we got Thomas. Lizza, do you mind introducing yourself?
Hi, yes, I'm Lizza Coffey. I work for Texas Health Benefits Pool, and I am the lead training and development specialist.
Amazing. Keith, how about you?
Hey, good morning, Garrett. Thanks for having me on. So I'm Keith Parry. I'm a retired Marine colonel. Spent 30 years in the Marine Corps in Special Operations. Retired to Austin in 2020. Attended University of Texas McComb's Executive MBA program, and came out of that and started work with the Lower Colorado River Authority as their vice president for physical security. Recently decided to make a change there, and I'm going to be beginning another role with another private security firm, working with a family office for some high net worth individuals and families in the Austin and in the national area across the U.S.
Very nice. And then Tom, how about you?
Sure. So supply chain specialist for over 30 years, came to Austin 26 years ago to work for Dell Technologies. I retired just over a year ago, senior vice president of global service parts supply chain, to focus on nonprofits. And my semi-retirement stage, I run the supply chain advisory board at Arizona State University. I'm thrilled to be here.
Amazing. And I'm Garrett Mintz. I'm the founder of Ambition in Motion. At Ambition in Motion, our vision is a world where the vast majority of people are excited to go to work. When they are there, their expectations meet reality. And when they come home, they feel fulfilled. And we believe that starts with leaders. We believe leaders create the experiences employees have while at work. And so we create technologies and communities to empower leaders to be their best selves for their teams. And one of the ways we build community is through executive symposiums, by bringing leaders together to discuss different leadership challenges and topics that they're facing, and more or less create environments where they can thrive and succeed. So let's dive in. So how to help employees effectively balance strategic work with tactical work. So in other pre-symposium panels, we've talked a lot about, some people are really eager to take on strategic work. Some people might struggle with the concept of thinking about strategic work. But I want to talk about the next layer, because I think early on in one's career, especially if someone's an individual contributor, their work starts out more often than not a little more tactical, getting work done, kind of very much like checking off different boxes that need to happen and get done. But as careers develop and as people work up into different levels of leadership, oftentimes the work becomes more strategic. What have you found to be really effective for coaching team members to think more strategically as their work evolves into more strategic work? Who wants to go first?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and jump in, Garrett, because I think it's a great question, and there's different levels of strategic, even in the maybe call it entry level roles. There's still going to be a strategic portion to it, but I don't think people think of it that way, and it takes them years to realize as they grow in their career that they just with the roles and responsibilities of their jobs, it has to change. And it's not natural, right? I think there's always that risk of being inundated with the tactical, even when you start to do the strategic as a bigger portion of your role. I'll never forget an employee of mine that was coaching somebody, to get to your question, on how they had to change their mindset. And the person was struggling. They were in the supply chain world, demand planning is a pretty typical role, and they were a planner. And then he moved them into a project management role. And in that role, right, you had strategic projects and tactical projects, but you had to just do things differently. And the individual was struggling. And as the story goes, he sat down with his manager and shared that struggle. And he says, I'm falling behind on certain areas, and I'm struggling to figure out how to manage my workload effectively. And because before it come in, and it was, 8 a.m. to 9 a.m., I do this, and then this, and then this, and then this. And he turned to him and he said, Juan, I won't say Juan's last name, he said, Juan, your job is when you first come in the morning is to think. That's it. First thing you should do is think, because the strategy piece is where he was struggling. And he said, you've got to spend time and schedule that time to, get yourself available so you can think through what you need to accomplish and how you're going to get us to our milestones. But the biggest thing that I've seen, and people that are struggling with that, is you've got to help them get a BMS, a business management system. Anybody at any level can get inundated with the tactical. The only way that I've seen to be effective in managing both is you have to have a BMS that clearly outlines what you want to achieve that quarter, that year, 3-year plan, and your governance model has to mirror that. People flip that. They think I have a governance model that will drive my BMS. You need a BMS that is supported by the governance model. And if you do it right, it is going to help you manage efficiently, spending that time on the tactical and the strategic at whatever level you are in the appropriate proportions. So helping somebody develop a BMS that works for their role, and then help them define what their governance model is going to be to run that. I worked for or with a senior vice president of manufacturing that would map it out every year brand new. I was never that good, right, at doing it, right? I just try to keep it continuous. But you've got to have that mindset to have the BMS and the governance model in place, and that allows you to be effective.
Keith, Lizza, what are your thoughts on that?
I think that the things that Thomas laid out, I think are spot on. And I think they mirror a lot of the things that I'll bring up. In developing, like, I always developed a strategic plan for my teams. But in order to do that, I also had to make sure that I first understood what the company vision and strategic goals were, because mine had to align with that. If I wasn't aligning with that, then we were going off the rails right from the get-go. And then what I would do is, because thinking about those things in strategic terms is very hard. I mean, it's even hard at my level when I've done it in the past, whether it was on national security issues when I was working in the Pentagon, or whether it was strategic long-term goals for LCRA. And now I'm thinking about them again for my next role that I'm going into. So breaking those strategic goals down into bite-sized chunks, what I call intermediate objectives, and then timelining that out. That's one part of it. But I think for me, the most important thing was always being able to explain the why, the purpose or the intent behind what you're doing as far as those strategic goals go. And that was important for me in particular, because I consider myself a lifelong learner. I'll learn from anybody and everybody that I can. And my plans, strategic plans, whether they're aligned or not, they may be missing critical components. I may have forgotten something. They may not be the best plans in the world. But if my people and my teammates know why we're doing something, it gives them insight into what the purpose is and what my mindset is. So they can come back to me and say, hey, did you think about X, Y, and Z? Oh, you know what? That is a good point. That's a much better way to deal with one of these intermediate objectives, or that's a better way to coach or couch basically one of those strategic objectives. So that was why it was so important to me to provide that why, because it empowered my teams in order to bring back better ideas to me. And the other reason is we used to say the enemy gets a vote. The enemy's not just going to take whatever you impose on them. And it's the same for business. You may create a capital project that will require taking on debt at a certain interest rate. However, if those economic and market conditions change and that interest rate changes, and you're now leveraged beyond what you want it to be, you need to have a backup plan. And by telling the why, your folks can go back and say, you know what, I get it. But what if you change this slightly, and then we can adapt to those changing conditions that you've got no control over, mind you. And so those are two reasons. One, it helps me in my planning, but it also helps with the strategic things and the conditions, the environmental conditions that you've got no control over, but you still have to incorporate into your plans. So by doing those, I can take it from the strategic level and make it tactical work. But at the same time, even that tactical work is thinking about those larger forces that will have an impact on the strategic level.
Lizza, what are your thoughts? How do you coach team members as you elevate them into more strategic work?
Well, first of all, shifting from an individual contributor to a leader means that you have to work on your critical thinking skills. And a lot of that comes from coaching, and mentoring. Your boss should have some succession planning, or leaders in doing that, because many times people are put in the management position and all of a sudden they're baffled as to how am I supposed to think strategically, right? And a lot of times it's not so much the strategy, it's the execution. Companies fail most 70% of the time because of strategy execution. Goals are not aligned. How do you teach people to align to their goals, to the company's organization, but additionally do some root cause analysis? By coaching someone to streamline, stabilize, and strengthen, then they create the product or the processes that will allow for them to have greasing the wheels so that they can move on to that strategic thinking and enable the organization to lead and accomplish its goal. That's really important because a lot of managers do not get that type of mentorship. Not only that, they have a lack of resources as well. So that's huge. It's not so much in the strategy. I think that's a myth, basically. That is the myth. How do you balance strategic strategy and tactical work? That's the myth, because a lot of it is in the execution, and the why, and the alignment.
Lizza and Tom, you both bring up really interesting, potentially opposite sides of the coin points here that I'm just going to bring to light. I'd be curious to learn your thoughts on this. But, Lizza, you're talking about this idea of sometimes there's challenges within the strategic execution. And Tom, you bring up the point of like, hey, when we clearly lay out a strategic vision of what we're trying to achieve here, when it comes to coming into work, come in and think, and then be able to analyze like, hey, what is my priority order? Like, just don't come in and just go on whatever fire is going on and just like take the fire hose and try to put everything out. Like, come in, think like, what is my biggest priority? What are things that I can put to the back burner? What are things that I need to elevate to the forefront of my mind? But Lizza, you bring up a great, sometimes fatal flaw that happens in organizations is when they've got competing or conflicting strategic initiatives. I've seen this where you've got, one strategic initiative that says, hey, we need to increase our operational efficiency and essentially decrease our operational expenditures. So decrease our operational expenditures so then we can be more profitable. But at the same time, they also say things like, hey, we need to invest in R&D and innovation, to invest in learning or trying new experimental approaches towards finding a new profit opportunity or operational expenditure reduction. And both of those are kind of competing things because the R&D is running in the very much hypothetical of like, this might work, this might not work. And the, maybe operational team, Tom, the supply chain team might be like, hey, we're working on how to reduce expenditures so then we can, be as profitable as we possibly can be. And those can sometimes be at odds with each other. How do you go about sifting through what's most important? And like, I guess, like I like to think of in baseball terms, like what's our warning track before we go over the edge, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I think, Garrett, that Lizza and I were actually aligned on that. I see the manager role, right? I called it thinking, she called it critical thinking, which is more apt. And that's personal development. But what you're getting to is organizational conflict. And I think it's what Keith said. What we would do at Dell, I'll share what I thought was, not everything we did was a best practice, but one of them was a strategy cascade. So the first thing, if you make a strategy in a silo, which to an extent is what you're referring to, Garrett, you're going to fail. It has to align to the corporate strategy. I don't like it when people say reduce costs as a strategy. And we're talking bigger picture, vision and mission. And then, so you get that set out by the executive leadership team, in our case, Michael Dell and his staff on down. And we would cascade it and say, here is what our annual operating plan or 3-year or 5-year, whatever conversation you're in, is what we wish to achieve. This is our high-level corporate strategy. We would cascade it down to every leader in the company. So my boss was the president of services. He would build out what he would have to accomplish within his organization. And he would cascade it to me, that I would then take it from the supply chain perspective and down to my leaders and so on and so forth. And everything had to tie. When we started that, maybe a decade ago, maybe more, I forget, it helped us not eliminate, but deal with the issue that you raised, where you will have, obviously, in any massive international company, some organizations that are more focused on execution versus strategy, cost reduction versus CE. But in everything, I don't like to say it's a conflict. I say it's finding the right balance. And every leader, especially at a global level, is going to have all of those in their annual operating plan that they're going to have to deal with. But when you do the cascade effect, you can tie it all back to the top. And it really got very, I mean, maybe not easy, but easier when, for whatever reason, when we went private many years back. And as you know, one strategy, one guy, one pocketbook, we used to say. And so if you had that conflict, you would just go back and tie it off to, okay, let's go look at the cascade. Are we achieving with this decision what the overall strategy is asking us to go do? And you got to work that balance. And it really gets tougher when you're in the trenches, right? Where people are very tactically focused and probably not on everything you're trying to achieve, just a small portion of that. But if the leadership all buys into the overall strategy and, as Keith said, the whys, understand it. We wanted every single team member to understand how they impact not their boss's strategy, not their boss's boss, all the way up. And I know I'm talking too much, but the best example I ever heard when we kicked this off, we use an example about getting men in the moon that Kennedy started. So we have a race to the moon. And he went and toured NASA. And he gave up his strategy, his mission, his vision, and he's touring NASA. And he's meeting people, shaking hands, kissing babies, as politicians do. He's going through the hallway and he bumps into a janitor and he just says, "Hey, what do you do here?" And he said, "My job is to get a man on the moon." That's what the janitor told President Kennedy. And he said, that's what we wanted at Dell, everybody to understand the mission. And his job was to keep that facility functioning so others could do their work, so they could put a man on the moon. I'm not saying we ever got that well alignment all the way through the organization, but I think it's a great way to do it, that strategy cascade.
I like the concept of a strategy cascade. I think it does a really good job of communicating the why, but I'd be curious to learn, everybody's perspective on this, but how much leniency do you incorporate team members into how they go about achieving their specific goals? So it's like, hey, our vision is to achieve X, whatever it may be, whether you're at Dell, whether you're at, NASA, whether you're at any company for that matter, our vision is to achieve X. How much leniency, how much leeway do you give to middle management, upper management, individual contributors to determine how they should go about achieving that for their own cascading point within the goal? Does that question make sense?
It does. And I think that I try to very hard not to use this answer, but I would say it depends. It depends on the individual. It depends on what organization or unit they're responsible for, because different units have different challenges and different tactical considerations that they have to take into account. So how much autonomy you give to that individual depends on the challenges that they have to face, because it may be different from group to group, and how experienced they are, how new they are to that role, or how long they've been in that role, so they have that additional experience. And then really how much they understand, and to Tom's point, what he calls the strategy cascade. We used to call top-down planning and direction and bottom-up refinement. So you'd get the mission or the strategy from on high, and as that filters down, and I tried very hard in order to give my folks as much information as I could on exactly what came down from on high. I wouldn't try to interpret it. I would take it and say, this is what we've been tasked to do, and then say, okay, this is the plan as I'm envisioning it to accomplish our portion of that. Thoughts. Let's war game this thing, red team this, and see what you come up with. And inevitably, we'd have some things that would come up, and I'd be like, hey, that's a great point. I forgot to add in X, Y, and Z. With those additional bits of information, does it make more sense to do it the way we're talking about, or do you still think your point is valid? Well, sir, it makes more sense now. A lot of times, most of the time, they bring in points that I hadn't considered, and it would actually help refine, hence that bottom-up refinement, refine the plan and make it even more in alignment with what the strategic goals were that came down from on high. So we would look at it from those perspectives, and it was exactly the same discussion that Thomas had in slightly different words. But after that point, as long as everybody understood what that higher level mission was, what the goals were for that, and they understood the planning process that we went through, I gave them all the autonomy in the world and said, hey, if you have any questions or if anything changes, I will come and let you know. If you see something that changes, come and let me know, regardless, but continue to do the mission. Don't stop the planning just because you can't get a hold of me, because there's going to be times, especially in my previous life, when you couldn't get a hold of me. You needed to continue executing the mission, and I had to have the trust and belief and to give them that autonomy. And how did I do that? Well, that happened well before we ever got a mission to go and do. It was training, it was development of those folks, so that when it came down to the point where they couldn't get a hold of me, or they couldn't get a hold of anybody really, they could still continue to execute that mission just based on their training, their experience, and everything that we had instilled in them beforehand.
Lizza, what are your thoughts on incorporating team members in the how in terms of the way they go about achieving the corporate vision or the why of the organization?
Well, aside from full transparency and communication and also the why, I think it's really important to outline those organizational goals along with departmental goals and how they support the overall impact of achieving that, and how each team member can develop their skill set in order to contribute to that. Now, as a manager, in order to assist them with coaching, training, mentoring, resources, it's also really important to find out what type of goals do they personally believe that they could work on. They may want to be working in strategy, for example, and not just being an individual contributor. They may want to be part of, something bigger. So how can you align those goals and match them with what they want to work on and develop is also really important, so that you have that balanced team effort in order to make an impact.
Garrett, I want to jump in and just share a few thoughts. When we would do a cascade, it's not one direction, right? When it gets down to the first level managers, they're empowered to come up with a strategy to achieve what's been handed down to them. But it's not in a silo either. They have to then present that, right? So organizational structure helps. And in my world, right, we had somebody in charge of strategy, right? So he would have to take all the different strategies and make sure they're aligned. So the example I used to give my team is, if you're a head football coach, I love sports analogies. You're kind of like a CEO these days. You're national champs this year, right? I say that every year. So
From your lips to God's ears.
So the opportunity, right? He's out there and he's got a highly paid offensive coordinators, defensive coordinators, special team coordinators, etc. They build a game plan, but they roll it up, and they're going to review it together. And he's going to make a decision. Wait, is this the right strategy or not? We missed something. Imagine somebody in a silo, building a strategy, even at first level manager, and has, okay, it's all execution. Well, what's your strategy? When we're talking strategy, we're talking multi-year. You have to have human resources, right? How are you developing your talent over the time? Not just how are you hitting your KPIs, right? How are you, what are you doing for technology for the future as process, people, and technology? And so we would take those and they would roll up and we would align across all the functions in my sphere of responsibility to make sure that made sense. They were empowered to go build it out, but it doesn't mean they did it in a silo. There'd be a lot of up and down. Say, no, you missed this, or I want to refine that. More of the empowerment in my world would be on the tactical side. We've locked on the strategy. We have locked on it, right? So we've all seen it. We've all bought off on it. We've all accepted, the areas where we've decided to lean in or sacrifice, et cetera. But it's one plan. We're all rowing in the same direction. Day-to-day execution, right? The BMS and the governance model would be in place in order to manage that, which would have a tremendous amount of empowerment, especially from a perspective of we're services, right? So supporting those customers. But yeah, they're empowered to build their strategy to achieve the overall strategy, but it doesn't mean it gets blessed, right? They still have to work that amongst the org structure and get everybody sign off.
I like it. I mean, I think all these things make sense. Like as a panel moderator, part of my job is to play devil's advocate and to think to myself, if everybody were to be following these core principles and these core concepts, this topic would be a relatively moot concept because it wouldn't be that interesting because everyone would be following it and everything would be good. But the reason why this is an interesting topic is because sometimes companies make mistakes in the process of actually implementing it. And I'd be curious to learn, what would you say are the bigger mistakes that companies make when it comes to effectively cascading some of these higher level vision strategic opportunities out? And, whether that be they give up on it too quickly and they make a change too fast, or maybe the board ousts the CEO who they set a strategic vision and then all of a sudden a new CEO comes in and says, hey, I'm the new cook in this kitchen. We're changing up the menu and we're going ahead and moving forward with some other new initiative or whatever it may be, or a variety of other things, but just jarring things that affect people within an organization that don't allow them to do the best work they can do. What are the mistakes that you feel like companies make that cause this topic to be a pressing topic and something that's of interest for organizations as they try to help team members balance strategic work with tactical work and effectively cascade and share the vision and essentially achieve the team goals that everyone's rowing together effectively?
Garrett, I'll take that first. From my experience in working as a global program manager for a top Fortune 100 company and several other tech companies, what I've seen is that there is so much ambition with those strategic goals about innovation and technology, but at what cost, right? And not only that, but they don't pare that down to what are the specific 5 top goals that we need to focus on, right? Because if we don't focus on 1 or 2 or 3 or whatever that number is, then you have change fatigue, burnout. There's also additionally not enough risk management, internal management of resources there. And I see that a lot. The forethought of technology and innovation, got to keep going. And it's actually a lot of times very premature and costly. Why not focus on your one product that you can do really, really well, make that, the best, for example, Coca-Cola, through the test of time, and then move on from there. Because what happens with big global corporations is that they put together too many objectives in their strategy. And then that cascade, cascading down to middle management causes a lot of confusion and burnout. And those are the most expensive resources that a company can have. That's what I've seen.
Tom, Keith, thoughts?
I think Keith and Lizza said it earlier. Lizza, you said that you might was 70% of the time the failure is because the strategy was wrong. So that is a risk. And Keith, you said a great quote: "The enemy gets a vote." So the environment could change. You can't predict everything. So those two risks are always out there, and you have to be able to adapt and adjust your strategy when things aren't going as you wish. But I think, Garrett, where you were trying to take us is when people maybe don't have true buy-in, right? Absolutely, I have seen people that signed off, walked out the room, and had zero intention, right? And I used to have a saying: I go into a meeting, and if I start sensing that, I said, I'm putting on my Dell hat. I don't know who the rest of you work for. When you put on your Dell hats, I'll come back, and I would just leave. Because you will have that. They get more focused on their own KPIs, and it's their tough jobs, right? So the tactical can eat you up. So when that occurs because the environment changed, the enemy made a decision that affected you, or COVID happened, right? Something occurred, and everything gets put on the back burner, right? Which is typically the strategy stuff. It can always be at risk. And I was horrible at it, right? For a long time, I was the king of tactical, right? I could execute all day long. And what I learned is I had to have on my staff somebody who every day was thinking about the strategy that we put in place. So we had a head of strategy. The guy was Jeff Moore, still doing it today. And he would, in our BMS, we would have to have our strategy cascade, and our governance model, it could not all be tactical. We would have set days where we were going to go check those milestones. Were we hitting them? He would force us to never forget what we had to go forward with and stay on track. But I think that over focus on tactical, going back to what Lizza was saying, is that if you have a strategy and it's not funded, well, that's a pipe dream, right? If you're gonna actually go out there and roll it out and not fund it, it's never going to happen, right? Which I think is not uncommon. And if the strategy is not balanced, right? You go through there, you say, yeah, I'm doing all the things I said I would, but now I got a whole workforce that I didn't train for the future. AI is changing everything. If you don't have people in your strategy every time, and how you're going to develop them, how you're going to recruit, and for the future jobs, not the current jobs. I've seen that cause failure time and again. They can nail everything else, but they forget that, the people they have today, they're not just going to, wake up one day, wave a magic wand, and they're prepared for what's going to change in their roles 3 years from now.
Tom, I really love that you talked about, hey, I'm going to put my Dell hat on. When you're ready to put your Dell hat on, we'll reconvene. It's something that I've seen happen a lot, and it's almost unintentional challenges with the financial incentives of people within the organization. So to give an example, one of the leaders in our executive mastermind group, he leads a software engineering team. He reports directly to the CTO. Part of the CTO's financial comp package is that every month his team, he needs to be rolling out a new feature, some new feature within their software, some new feature within their technology. They need to roll out a new feature every single month. That's part of his financial comp package. So if he hits that after the span of a year, he gets a pretty sizable pay bump for putting out a new feature every single month. But their overwhelming feedback from their customers is, hey, stop rolling out the new features. I'm still catching up on the features that you rolled out last month, and I'm still kind of mind-boggled with all this. Like, this is not helping my user experience, and ultimately, I'm going to leave you if you keep out rolling new features. The CTO's like, we're not going to stop rolling out new features. I stand to get a pretty sizable pay bump at the end of the year for rolling out new features. So we're just going to keep doing that. And I guess sometimes what I'm trying to get at is the financial incentives are unintentionally misaligned to the ultimate goals of the organization. How do we go about auditing that and reevaluating and just more or less ensuring that it's it's all aligned together. Because the flip side is if you don't have that sort of incentive, maybe the CTO says, hey, I'm not incentivized to create any new features because I'm not getting compensated to do any of that. And so where do we strike the fine balance? It's hard to create hard and fast rules around that. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I've got very passionate thoughts on when
Please.
you're doing performance plans for executives, they had better be heavily weighted to the overall success of the company. So you don't over leverage your department, right? So if you're not supporting those other groups, right, you're a CTO, right? You've got to be supporting the entire company. And if you've got one KPI in a performance plan that ties to a financial incentive that is going to outweigh everything else, you've got a problem. So first, it's got to be tied a big chunk of that to the overall, hey, guess what? If we don't achieve A, B, and C, nobody's getting anything. So you better be focused on that. Now, hey, Tom, you got to have some things where you got skin in the game and your function. That still has to be balanced. The customer experience has to be, in my opinion, the most highly weighted. The financial piece or launching a new product, driving the revenue is going to be a big chunk. But if you were doing something in my world where you were hurting the customer, there would be a balance in that performance plan. Say, no. So great, you're getting your products out every time, but the quality of the product, the customer satisfaction, if that's not there, you're not getting any points, right? So it has to be balanced. People don't spend enough time on developing proper performance plans, especially when they're tied to financial incentives. If you do that right, then it just makes life a whole lot easier, right? And to me, the biggest thing you can assess executives on is their ability to collaborate. And when you see an executive take a hit to their individual functional KPIs that make something better for the customer and better for the company, those are the people that long-term are going to succeed.
Wow. Man, that's such a great point. That's I know this is me pie in the sky ideaing it, but there's like car facts for cars to know the history of cars. It'd be cool if there was like executive facts where it'd be like, here are scenarios where an executive cratered his or her own KPIs for the sake of the organization. You add it to your own like resume credibility report. I don't know. I just think I'm pie in the sky idea in here. I'm putting ideas out there. I just think that would be a really cool concept because you're so right, Tom. That's kind of a big differentiator between who succeeds and who doesn't succeed. But so often people are very like they put it out there like I'm for the team, I'm for the organization, but when it comes to financials and their own personal finance, that's where the rubber meets the road. And oftentimes people are choosing the self-fulfilling, road of what's going to fill my pockets and not necessarily the organization's.
To me, it's a big difference between leaders and managers, right? Leaders lead, bigger picture. They're doing things that are right for the company, right for the customer. Managers are just looking at that performance plan, making sure they're hitting their KPIs, doing the tactical stuff, doing the day-to-day, but not really driving the bigger picture. One thing we get at Dell quite a bit is 360s, where you get evaluated by all your peers. And you can see which ones that, who do you want to work with? How do they rate you? We do Tell Dell every year. You get tons of feedback. And in the end, the ones who are collaborative and really get that bigger strategy, you see the success. You see those are the ones that are long-term. Somebody who's just in it for themselves and their financial, eventually, even with the Peter principle, eventually everybody's going to know.
Lizza, Keith, what are your thoughts on that?
I know we were talking about strategy development, but I think it goes, my point that I'm going to bring up goes into risk mitigation, operational efficiency, P&L, KPIs, everything. All of that, everything is driven by people, processes, systems, and whatever facilities you may have. I focus on the people. And my personnel were always the main focus on me above anything else. And the reason for that is because the Marine Corps used to have a saying, mission first, Marine always, Marines always. It meant to make everybody remember like, hey, our primary focus is whatever mission we were handed down. And oh, by the way, we take care of our Marines and families as well. But I used to flip-flop that. So I would always say Marines first, mission always. And it was a subtle difference, but it was one that my senior officers, recognized, and they're like, "No, you got it backwards." I'm like, "No, I didn't." Because if I focus on developing my team and not coddling them, not taking care of them and coddling them, but like hard, realistic training, um, being as brutally honest as I could be with them, telling them the why every time we had an opportunity to, and sometimes there wasn't an opportunity, in which case they would always come back and say, "Hey, Keith has always been good about telling us why we're doing something. If he's not doing it now, there's a reason for it, and I'm sure he'll circle back to it." And then them knowing, recognizing that I would do everything in my power to support them moving forward, whether that was, when I was in the Marine Corps, or whether that was I was in the corporate world. And it built trust, it built relationships, and it built their own competencies and the competencies of our team to kind of work together and collaborate together. And that's the most important thing, because if you build that kind of team, they're going to be great at anything that you ask them to do. They're going to be able to accomplish it because they have the confidence, the skill sets, and the relationships to collaborate and do those kinds of things. And it doesn't matter whether it's strategy development, whether it's figuring out what the risks are and then developing plans to mitigate those, whether it's coming up with operational efficiencies like, "Hey, why is my production falling off?" And then you bring in some of your friends because they know that you're a team player and you've developed them, and they're going to help you figure it out. And that's going to lead to better P&L statements, and that's going to lead to improved KPIs. So for me, it was always about the personnel, breaking down silos, increasing collaboration, efficiency, and trust, because ultimately that's why they call it the bottom line. The bottom line is going to be improved. So, and not everybody is, and I said this to many people, and Tom, I think you'll appreciate the sports analogy. I'd rather have a team of 3- and 4-star recruits that I can develop into those 4- and 5-star recruits than a whole team of 5-star recruits that are just caring about themselves and aren't really those team players.
Developing talent wins.
Lizza, do you have any thoughts on that topic?
Well, I love to develop talent. That's part of my role. So I want everyone to be a rock star. But I do agree, and I completely agree wholeheartedly with what Thomas and Keith have put out there. I do also believe that leaders can also be in managers. Managers are the ones who lead teams. Managers are the ones who develop a team, and create the next level. We, at our company, everyone is a leader across the board. So we're a much smaller company. Instead of a global company, you can't necessarily go to the CTO or CFO and talk to them and be like, "Hey, I have this idea," But as a smaller company, we do invoke and welcome those people who come up and be like, "I have an idea," or "I really appreciate this about the company and I'd like to move to the next level." So I do think that, yes, managers can also be leaders and also work with their teams and train, a lot of training and coaching to get people to the next level.
Yeah, we used to be fond of saying everybody can be a leader, right? ICs can be leaders, right? Some of the greatest innovations that have led to change in a company come from the people that touch the product or touch the customer each and every day, which are typically your individual contributors. So I believe everybody can be a leader. I think there's a difference between leading and managing, right? So if in a great company, all your managers are great leaders. Man, it's a title. A title does not make you a leader. How you act and behave determines whether or not you are a leader. And you get a lot of people say, "I don't ever want to have to be responsible for an organization and have to manage people, but I can still lead. I can still be the greatest engineer ever and bring forward the greatest ideas and advocate and fight for them." You get people thinking like that, I think you're significantly better off. And then you'll love it, Keith. My head of procurement is a retired Marine, and I'm starting to get more insight now with your quote on mission first, Marines always, or the Marines first and mission always. he always had, he goes, would share with us and changed our organization quite a bit with things aren't always going to go our way, but we will always, and we're not historically at Dell, that we will always be professional. And he changed our entire procurement organization. And because we were, kind of grew up very entrepreneurial, there would be a lot of passion in meetings. Maybe some inappropriate words would be flying back and forth. And Keith, the retired Marine, always a Marine, right? Changed all that and said, we will be professional in every scenario with every outcome. And he set that across his org and it worked.
I always told my teams, like, listen, I'm going to tell you everything I know. We're going to go through the plan kind of as I envision it. And we're going to kind of red team this or walk through it. And then I want you to pick it apart. And everybody has a voice. At the end of the day, though, when we have to make a decision, ultimately, I'll be the one that makes the decision for our department or our unit. And just as I got the mission handed down, and you will never know whether I liked the mission or how I was told to do it, because once I got that and I accepted it, it was as if it was as if it was my idea from the get-go. And when we leave here, even if I don't take some of your recommendations, I'll try to tell you why we're going to deviate from that, but you will execute it as if it came straight from your brain or straight from your heart, and that's where we're going to go forward to that professionalism aspect. And then we'll make the adjustments on the fly as we need to, because that's what good teams do.
Well, Lizza, Keith, Tom, this has been a really great pre-symposium panel. I feel like we've covered a lot of ground here in terms of how to help employees effectively balance strategic work with tactical work. If you're watching this and you're thinking to yourself, oh my gosh, I want to meet these three great leaders, come to the Executive Symposium on Thursday. I'll post the link in the comments on how to RSVP. But we're going to cover this and many more great topics relevant to how to help employees effectively lead, or how to help employees effectively balance strategic work with tactical work on Thursday in Austin, Texas. So if you can make it, we'd love to see you there. Lizza, Keith, Tom, thanks for being here. Thanks for your time, everybody.